Hello, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Deenie.
Seamless as always. And we are the property marketing strategists. Thank you all for joining us this lunchtime to join us for our first webinar of 2026 as part of the Youth Forum programme. We recently hosted a focus group and conducted a survey to our Gen Z database about first impressions when moving into student accommodation and how that can impact the overall satisfaction. We found the responses really interesting and we wanted to share them with you. So thank you for joining us. And the report and sound bites will be sent to anybody who has signed up to this webinar afterwards. So do keep an eye out for those as well. Thank you, as always, to StudentCrowd for being our Youth Forum partners and to Utopi and Homes for Students for sponsoring the Youth Forum as well. We have a Q&A function, so please do ask questions along the way. We will get to them throughout the webinar or we'll come to them at the end if that's more appropriate. And we have some esteemed guests to join us today to talk about all things first impressions. So I'm going to hand over to them now to introduce themselves. Over to you, Nicola.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicola Rollin-Boone. I'm Portfolio Operations Director at Homes for Students. I've been working in operations with Homes for Students for 7 years this year, so I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It takes up a big part of my job, so very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Now, Ben, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, or hello again everyone. My name is Ben and I'm the co-founder at Utopi.
And last but not least, Mike.
Hi everyone, I'm Mike Coxon. I am the Higher Education and PBSA lead at StudentCrowd. I've been working in the sector, this is my 10th year, so very excited and very happy to be here speaking to you all.
I think I've known you for the entire 10 years, Mike. That's
pretty sure, yeah.
That's how old we are. I'm going to hand over to Deenie now, who's going to talk through some of the key findings from this research. So over to you, Deenie.
Thank you. And yeah, before you get on with the chat, because I know we're going to have a very interesting conversation, we just wanted to talk about the stats that we had, which the first one, which is really positive, which is 86% of students were satisfied with their move-in experience, which shows what a great job everyone is doing. Location and convenience is the single biggest driver of first impressions, cited in 17.5 of mentions. As you'd expect, staff behaviour, safety and room condition cleanliness collectively account for nearly 40% of first impression influence, showing that both people and environment matter. 70% of students felt that their first impression strongly influenced their overall satisfaction of their accommodation. So we are still in an era of first impressions count. We asked around communication channels, and digital communication is the most useful source for information when first moving in, with welcome emails, apps and online portals and websites topping the list there. That is to say that other forms of communication were useful, so there's definitely a balance of mix that people are looking for. And small interest-based events are most popular among students, with 46% saying they'd choose this type of event, in contrast to 41% who prefer larger events, but still not massive sway one way or the other. So I think it's that general kind of balance of things is what's seeking for. There's lots of other great stats and we are working on the final bits of the report soon. So that will be out to you shortly. So do make sure you read through the report after the webinar to get all those juicy insights.
Perfect. Thank you, Deenie. So we're now going to talk about some of the key findings of the report and how it really can impact operators and kind of add value to what they're doing and potentially make changes. It sounds like that'd be pretty hard to do when 86% of students were satisfied with their move-in experience, right? It sounds like everyone's, you know, really happy. So, but that's not the whole story. Obviously, when you scratch beneath the data, there's a lot more to take from it. So panelists, I'm going to hand over to you now. What are your initial reactions to the research? Is there anything that surprised you or shocked you, or are you just, you know, delighted that everybody seems incredibly happy? I'm going to pass over to you first, Nicola, if that's okay.
So I think it was really interesting to read. I don't think there was anything that shocked me in there, but I think what I was pleasantly surprised by was actually how positive it was, because I think you worry a lot about students checking in, and they're making probably the biggest change to their lives that they would have made up until that point. So I always feel a real responsibility around check-in and welcoming students to their new home. So I think it was really nice to see that actually overwhelmingly there is a positive experience. There's always work to do, but that was really good to hear, because actually a lot of time and effort goes into this. The teams on the ground put a lot of effort into it. So it was nice to see that being reflected. We do see that in our surveys that we do as well, but I think it was pleasantly surprised to see how positive it was.
Absolutely. Mike, did you pick anything out from it that was a surprise or a shock?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Nicola says. I don't think there was anything that was hugely shocking. I think it was very positive, and it's always good to see. As I mentioned, working in the sector for 10 years, there's been an awful lot of change in that time. I think about all the things that have gone on in the wider world, as well as everything that's changed in the higher education and student housing space. But there are some fundamentals that remain: the importance of having the best staff there to give that positive experience, how important location is going to be, value for money, all of these things. I think the main thing that surprised me when looking at how the students felt on arrival, it was both not so much a surprise to see that the majority felt what I would say were quite positive emotions, or quite normal emotions, but also within that how small the window is. Because if we look at the emotions list, I'm sure we'll go into some more detail, but there's a very small window of emotions that student accommodation providers can actually actively influence. So that idea of feeling overwhelmed or lonely, they are areas where you can have a real impact on changing those, especially the one, and thankfully a very small percentage, feeling disappointed. And it just shows those very fine margins that, yes, it might be the minority that end up feeling this way, but there is still a real difference that you can make, and it will have that wider knock-on effect if you can just address those small issues. And I think that's what makes the difference between an operator who's really nailing that moving experience and one that maybe has a lot of work to do.
Just to jump in there, we have got those stats. So overall, 60% of students report positive emotions, which are excited, reassured, calm and confident, compared with 40% feeling anxious, overwhelmed, lonely or disappointed. And I think, Mike, you kind of hit on it there, that actually some of those are feeling anxious and overwhelmed. It's probably quite a natural thing when you're moving out of home for the first time, so not necessarily negative one.
100%. Even now, I mean, I've moved through many homes and I still have those feelings whenever I move house. So
yeah, I think Oh, sorry, Nicola.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, it is one of the biggest things they're going to go through, and it's one of the biggest things that their parents, their carers, whoever's there with them is probably going to have gone through as well. And I think it's just being really mindful of, this is a huge moment in people's lives. Like, I remember when I went to uni feeling all of those emotions, being excited, but also nervous, and am I going to make friends, and who am I going to be living with, and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's not shying away. Like, it's okay for them to feel all of those emotions. Like, it's not, that is totally normal. I think it's helping them understand that it is normal to feel that way. And I know we're going to talk about it, but it's actually what we do to help ease them into their new life that makes the real difference. You can do lots to influence how they feel on the day in terms of making them feel prepared, controlling the controllables, but actually you can't control how someone's going to feel in that moment, because they may not know. And sometimes they turn up excited and an hour later they're anxious and scared and upset and all of those things. So you almost have to control everything around them that you can, and then how they feel in that moment is how they're going to feel almost.
They're starting university as well, aren't they? It's not just a new home. Like, there's a whole load of other stuff. So it's quite hard to differentiate between, like, is that feeling and emotion because of their new accommodation, or is it all this stuff that's wrapped up around the fact that there's loads of new people they've not met, they've got to find out where their first class is, sign up for their degree or whatever. There's so many other emotions going on, so it's hard to sort of differentiate it. One of the things that shocked me a little bit was around the comms piece. I was really, really interested to see that the sort of way they wanted to be communicated with the most was a welcome email. I thought like the younger generation have kind of sacked emails off and they're on WhatsApp or they want to be using apps. So the fact that that has come up top, I think it was 17, just over 17% versus 14% on an app. That actually shocked me a little bit because I genuinely thought they were a little bit more sort of towards the digital side of things. But looking at all of the different stats there, for me, it shows that operators have got to do it all really well because it's so blended and so even. Like there's not much of a percentage difference between all the different communication channels that they've said. So getting it all right is key. But I was really shocked to see email as number one.
Although I was reflecting on this, and we've just said that some of the feelings that students get is like overwhelm. Could they be getting overwhelmed potentially because of the kind of the communication as well? Because don't forget, this report isn't just covering that move-in experience, it's kind of first impressions, which kind of probably accounts for the first couple of months maybe. And I can imagine that there's a lot of information having to be shared, and probably at this stage of their kind of accommodation lifestyle, a lot of it might be kind of rules focused, you know, remember to do this, don't do this, stop doing this, you know, have you done this? And that could add to their feelings of kind of overwhelm, really. And then if we're saying that there isn't a preference, you know, a really clear preference of how students want to be communicated with, so therefore you've got to cover all bases. So a student might be getting the same communication via email, via their app, you know, maybe on social media as well. You know, maybe somebody saying it verbally whilst them, you know, they're passing reception. There might be a note, you know, in the lift, you know, about, I don't know, taking your bins out or something. So I can kind of understand that overwhelm. So there should, you know, I think that's probably something for our audience to kind of take away, really, is maybe that streamlining of information, really, of kind of how and when to kind of try and help alleviate those situations of overwhelm.
Yeah.
What do you all think?
I mean, sorry, go on, Nick.
No, go on, Mike. Go.
I was going to say, I 100% agree. I mean, it's very tricky with something like moving into a new home because there is a lot of rules and regulations around student accommodation. There is a lot of things you need to be aware of, whether they are formal things like where you can or can't go for a smoke or a vape, or what time the dinner is served if you're living in catered halls. But at the same time, it's making sure that those messages go out via the right channels. Like you say, it might be putting when the bins are collected in a lift is substantial, but at the same time, it's something that you might forget as the year goes on, or a poster gets taken down or covered up. Do you need to be able to refer back to those? And in which case, it probably isn't the best place to put them on social media or in a WhatsApp group. It's much better to have them somewhere that a student can refer back to and can regularly look back on should they need to. Does it need to be a web-based message, or does it need to be something that is just kind of thrown in there as a hint or tip? And it's getting that balance to make sure that students have the information they need when they move in, but also the information that they're going to need in 6 months' time. And yeah, making sure that the right channel is there.
I think we've done a lot of work on this, and we actually do send welcome emails. That's how we do it, and we have 3 that we send ahead of time, so ahead of check-in, and that has pretty much everything in there that they need to do. There's bits they need to work through, so yes, it's rules and regulations, but it's around how they work through that and all of that piece. And what I think is really important is all of that stuff happens prior to check-in, so they've got time to sit, read, absorb all of that stuff. And then we try and take away some of the kind of logical stress beforehand, so down to things like, if you're checking in, how do you get there? How do you park? Can you park at the building? If you can, for how long? And then where can you go? Because, you know, over the years, they tend to be the things that sort of last straw for people, of like, I don't know where to park. I've been in the car for 6 hours and everyone's stressed and nervous and now I don't know where to park. So we put a lot of work into that. So actually when they arrive at the property, they've sort of got all of that and they've been able to read it in a calm environment, and they can focus on what should be a fun experience for them. It should be an exciting experience for them. And I think, you know, we do that. We have an app that we get them to sign up beforehand. Everything's on there. We have notice boards. We do all of those things. And one of the most impactful things I think you can do when students move in is have a really simple event of, pop down to reception at these times. And what we're going to do is talk to you a little bit about the property and what goes on, like here's your bins and whatever else. We're also going to take you out into the city. This is the route to get to uni. This is your doctor. This is the closest supermarket you can shop at. You know, if you are from the UK, like this is an Aldi, super cheap. This is Marks and Spencer's, like nice food, but a bit more expensive. Like here's where the shops are. You know, here's where you can go and have a sit in the outdoors. There's the local park for you. And I think sometimes we forget about the really simple things. We talk about all the big stuff, but actually, it's just giving them options of where they want to get that information from. You have got to get that initial information somehow. We've found email still remains the best way. So actually very much in terms of what your findings are. But then it's about options of how you want to do things. And there's some people that go, I absolutely am not interested in you taking me and showing me where a shop is. Like I'll go on Google Maps, I'm fine. And there's other people that are, you know, that is absolutely a way to build connections and understand the city a bit more. So it doesn't always have to be massive things.
And Ben, I think you've got some kind of thoughts and observations about sort of communications as well, particularly in relation to, you know, if buildings do have Utopi products, kind of how they engage with that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges we face in sort of check-in is around, you know, students not knowing how to use the heating, for example. They sort of get in there, they see a panel heater or a radiator and they're struggling to figure out how to turn it up or down, or it might have a boost button on it, or it might be automated like throughout the building. So I think one of the things we've been trialing, because we do get a lot of feedback from our customers on this, because the last thing the operator wants is a load of people coming down to reception and saying, you know, I don't know how to use my heating, or it's too hot or it's too cold, because it's just inevitable that it's going to happen. So we've been trialing a few different ways to sort of try and alleviate that pressure on the operator and try and help the student out. And we're trialing a QR code at the moment, which kind of goes on the heating system, and they can scan that. And then our marketing team have been playing around with sort of AI generated explainer videos. So just scan the QR code, it'll go straight through to a portal which will show those videos, and it teaches them how to use it. I think, you know, getting the information to them to try and avoid the sort of headaches for the operator is our sort of key mission really when it comes to this, because we know that move-in time, there's loads of other things going on that's nothing to do with Utopi or it being too hot or too cold. You know, yeah. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the key things that we've been working on. We're trialing it now in a few assets, and it seems to be working.
I love that idea. It's such a great idea. We are definitely less technical. We just have videos on Instagram that they're pinned at the top that they can go and watch of how to turn on an oven. But I think I just think students would love being able to scan a QR code and see how to use. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. I mean, like there's lots of other options. Like we do have like you know, intranets and things. We've got resident facing portals that you can scan a QR and go to and understand a little bit more about what Utopi is. You know, because I think there's sometimes a little bit of pushback, especially when we're trying to sort of reduce energy within an asset. It doesn't always go down well with a student. So one of the big things that we have to try and do is alleviate that for both parties, really. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see on the stats there that social media and WhatsApp groups is in terms of a communication channel is at 8.26%, which again is a lot lower than I thought it would be, because, you know, a lot of the students are in WhatsApp a lot of the time anyway. So you'd sort of think that maybe that was a place they would want to be communicated with. And we're also trialing WhatsApp channels for our customers as well, so they can go in there and they can ask a question. We can then respond to it instead of the operator. But, you know, if only 8% of them are sort of seeing it as a preferred communications channel, then, you know, I think we have to rethink exactly how we communicate with them. And this information for us as a business has been really helpful. You know, never mind for an operator, we can see what the students are looking for. It's great.
I think from kind of previous surveys that we've done about communication, sort of anecdotal things from focus groups as well, I think some communication channels by young people are seen as quite intrusive. And probably then of us that are in kind of, you know, WhatsApp groups, particularly if you've got kids and you're in the football WhatsApp group and the year 9 WhatsApp group and stuff, I can appreciate that really. You can't, you know, you can mute it really, but other than that, it does feel, you know, particularly if it's a lot of information, that it might be kind of intruding into your day. Whereas I guess with an email, you can choose to read it when you want to read it in your own time. It doesn't have to kind of, impact you, then and there, which might, we're talking about kind of feelings of overwhelm and anxiousness. I think we probably do have to bear in mind kind of when we're communicating, how many times we're communicating, and probably that coordinated approach between kind of operations and marketing as well, because they might well be getting different messages from different departments as well. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth kind of looking at that overall journey and communications plan. I just wanted to come back to something that Nicola touched on about kind of events, and I guess that's what we're saying, is that if you've got like QR codes and things that kind of are likely to negate the amount of questions that come back to reception, it'll free up operations teams to do the caring and the fun stuff, really. Let's kind of take that. So the events thing was quite interesting. Deenie mentioned the statistic in our kind of opening, and it's actually really split about kind of small events versus larger events as well. So just to recap, small interest-based events were most popular, 46%, while 41% preferred larger events. Small events are particularly important for neurodiverse students as well. And also neurodiverse students are more likely to attend events in general, but they prefer the smaller ones as well. So I really like what Nicola said about kind of having that kind of let's get out of the building into the city. That's completely optional, and people can take that how they want. But I think a lot of the time these welcome events are usually like a big party, lots of food, lots of people. I think sometimes from what we've seen throughout the year, they kind of separate maybe into those kind of smaller interest groups, but that initial kind of thing is usually quite big. So I think it's quite interesting that we need to kind of look at how big some of those events are. I think one thing that always gets me, and I've done so many check-in weekends, I don't care to remember how many I've done. I hate leaving them. Like, I feel like you have the big hoo-ha, the big check-in, and then most of the staff leave by like 6 o'clock, and you're kind of leaving them to it. And I always find that really sad, and I hope that everybody has found their people and they're not on their own. So yeah, I guess what can you all kind of suggest or think about those kind of events and welcoming people in a bit more of a fun way, really?
I think if we take it right back to the start, when we talk about first impressions, they've generally picked where they're going to live based on loads of things, but some of that will be a vibe, won't it? If they're living in a 1,400 bed property, they've probably got a different vibe to someone living in like a 60 bed studio only property. Generalizing, obviously, but tend to pick. And the one thing we've done is we've pushed our welcome parties back. I absolutely think there's a place for welcome parties, but we tend to do them later now, sort of October, once everyone's checked in. Because I don't think welcome parties don't create communities for people. They're great, and they're great to get everyone together, and they're fun and all of that stuff. But actually what people need in the first few weeks are connections, and a massive welcome party doesn't necessarily build that. If you're really outgoing and love that kind of thing, of course you will, but there'll be loads of people out there that think, I don't know if I want to go to that event, it's going to be really busy and whatever else. But if they've already engaged in smaller events and found their people within the property, actually they're more likely to come to that. And Mike, you'll be able to talk on this much better than me, but I know for neurodivergent students, if they attend events within, I think it's the first month, they are then much more likely to engage throughout the year. If you can't capture them in that time, they will switch off to those events. So I think it's about really thinking about how you can get people together. One thing we do is on our app, which is called Click, we ask students to tell us what their interests are before they arrive, so we can get a view of, have we got people that are into scrapbooking, board games, whatever that might be, and try and tailor some events around that. I think it's also about talking to students about what they want. So doing lots of different types of events, getting them to sign up so that we can see how many people are coming, and making sure that we facilitate those events as well, because the first few weeks is really hard. Even if you do a smaller event, you need someone there to facilitate, like talk to each other, like what uni are you at? Are you on the same course? Are you doing something similar? Have you got interests? I think if you don't facilitate that straight away, they can fall flat quite quickly. I'm a really strong believer in events need to be varied. I think there's a real feeling now of like, oh, pizza event where we gave away food, it's really naff. But students still enjoy that, and sometimes that might be what brings them out of the room, and sometimes that might be the only sort of tasty hot food they've had that day, because being at uni might be really difficult for them. And I think just sometimes there's a bit of snobbery around events like that, and actually there's nothing wrong with those events as well. It needs to be varied, it needs to try and engage different people. I think, yeah, sometimes there's a bit of snobbery around. Sometimes the simple things that we've already done are the best. But I think understanding who's in your building is really key. I know in one of our buildings last year, we had a customer service advisor who realised that they hadn't seen a student for a while, and actually went onto our app and saw that they were into scrapbooking and put an event on for scrapbooking and reached out to them and were like, we really think you should join this event. And I just think that for me is such a like moment of like, it's powerful. Like, we've identified this person isn't engaging, we've identified what might engage, we've got them out of their room. And I just think there's something really powerful in getting people out of their rooms and making connections, because it's tough. It's tough to make new friends, right? We all remember that. It's a bit easier when you're younger, but I think it's important to remember that it's not easy to put yourself out there to make new friends.
Yeah, that's because sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, 100% agree with you, Nicola. And just having a look, so from the StudentCrowd reviews over the last 3 years, when we're looking at topics mentioned in the reviews around social experience and well-being, the top 3 are community and living experience, social atmosphere and vibe, and then events and activities. And on average, where the events and activities have been referred to in the reviews, the score of that review is 4.67 out of 5. So they tend to be mentioned in a positive light, which shows that importance and that difference it can make between having an inadequate events program or something that hasn't catered widely, to having something that is really going to stand out for the students and give them something they need. I think it's absolutely right, especially when looking at that well-being piece of listening to students, listening to what they're saying. I mean, when you've got somebody booked into your accommodation, you're already going to know a fair amount about them, their backgrounds, their nationality, any additional needs that they may have. I mean, in some cases, even more than that, when you're surveying to find interest, to match people with suitable flatmates. So it's referring to that and being able to build that picture, but then also looking at areas like review platforms, social media. Increasingly, all of these things are being collated by AI. So doing that research to say, okay, what do we need to cater for this intake? What is going to be of most interest? What's worked well elsewhere? There's nothing to stop you going onto your competitor sets websites, going onto their review pages, whether that's on StudentCrowd or elsewhere, and seeing what other people cited as positives. And obviously we're a very friendly sector. I'm sure you all have networks of people working elsewhere. It's just making sure that you listen, see what works, but also refer it back to your own student intake, the demographic of your halls, and making sure that you're not leaving people excluded, whether that is, it may only be 1 or 2 people, but it's making sure that they're catered for too.
And I think those buildings can change as well. Just because it was this last year doesn't mean that it'll, if it was party last year and that's what they enjoy, it doesn't mean it'll be the same this year. And I think that's really interesting. And you do see a bit of an ebb and flow with buildings of, like, you don't necessarily, it's not a case of we've got the same students in this building every year, so we nailed it last year, so it's done. Yeah. Like, you can't become complacent with it.
Yeah. I think the other interesting stats that came out on that topic is about timing. So 40% of our respondents said that they prefer weekday evenings for events, while 31% prefer weekend evenings. We have covered this, I think, in other youth forums as well. And as a parent, what I would say is actually, I think students are going out less, they're spending less money. And, from my own stepdaughter who's at university, she said weekends are actually really quiet. and you know, they don't really know what to do because there's no events on, and a lot of it otherwise is going out and spending money as well. So I do think that's worth considering about, is that kind of timing. And like I said, it might be that that's your point, to kind of gather together maybe the less outgoing, the less confident students, because maybe there are loads of friends that are actually absolutely out partying it in the city centre on a Saturday night, but those people who are left in the accommodation that are at a bit of a loss of what to do, that could be a real way of engaging them. The other thing I wanted to bring up as well, in the focus groups, I know, Deenie, you were in the focus group, there was a bit of a focus on alcohol, wasn't there?
Yeah, so I think 2 or 3 of the people in the focus group were, and I was quite surprised to hear this, was still kind of saying that actually a lot of the activities revolve around alcohol. And I don't know, they were referring generally about welcome events, which could be across the campus and accommodation, but I think they're still felt, for those that don't drink, which is quite a few of this generation, it still felt that actually, if it's going out to be a big heavy drinking night, I don't really want to go. What's for me? And it kind of felt that that came across in the focus groups, that was something that was missing.
There was one quote that we put in the report here from Sophia, who said, "I'd really appreciate more events. At the moment, the only time I see most people is when the fire alarm goes off." And that's so sad.
I read that and felt really sad.
Yeah.
And I was also like, how often's your fire alarm going off as well?
Yeah.
Like,
Probably a lot.
but no, I think that's really sad.
Yeah, and she said, otherwise I don't even know who lives here. So again, that just shows the importance, you know, because that first impression, otherwise, like, is Sophia going to live in that building for a 2nd or 3rd year? If that's her experience, like, probably not.
We have got one question, Sarah, and I was just going to say that kind of links in with this question, is that we're very much in a world where one size doesn't fit all. I think across all this data, you've got to do lots of different things to kind of meet the needs of the entire community. And Justina has come back to the comms question, and is, would you say that comms channels like WhatsApp and social media are less reliable? And Jen said no, therefore they're actually quite prepared and well educated to be going to better sources of information like websites, emails from the institution, etc. Unlike what we expect younger people, because we witness them spending so much time on social media. But is it for different reasons? They're perhaps more critical and aware than we may give them credit for.
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? I guess it's those assumptions, isn't it? Like I said, we probably all assumed that the communication section of the report would be different to what it is. But I think it is probably the like Justina sort of alludes to in her question, it's different communication channels for different reasons. Again, I'm pretty sure we've covered this in another youth forum, but I think they said that they're kind of, a lot of them go to social media for entertainment, and they don't actually want that to be interrupted, you know, by rules and things, you know, things to remember, really. I guess that's probably why they've moved away from Facebook, because their parents and grandparents are probably on Facebook, and they don't want their entertainment being interrupted by that. And probably Instagram and TikTok is something that they feel, you know, that's their downtime. I know that my kids use that as their kind of downtime. They probably don't want to be bombarded in those channels with being nagged.
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting when you were talking about the comms, is that actually, compared to generations gone by where you didn't have many options of how you could be communicated, you kind of got a letter, or you got a phone call, or you spoke in person, and that was it. Whereas now there's so many different ways you can communicate that you can have a preference. And I think that's what we're seeing in the data, is that not everyone, you can't just say, well, I'm going to communicate by this route and you've got to deal with it, because some people don't like that route, whereas that wasn't a case before. And that's making it harder for marketeers and communications teams to do it right for everyone, which is costing time and money. And that's just part of the world that we're currently living in.
I just think, you know, if you're scrolling Instagram and your property team's on there, it's a bit like having your mum on there, isn't it? To a degree, like, you know. And I think we are really free with our Instagram. Like, every property has their own Instagram account, and it's very much reflective of the property. It's not a corporate thing, and we get great engagement from students on there. But I think our view is very much like, that's what that's for. It's fun. It's for that kind of engagement. I think if you start then introducing, you know, you need to contact us about debt on there, it almost doesn't feel like the right channel. For some people, that is the right channel, but does feel a bit like you say with Facebook, it's a bit like your mum being on there, isn't it? You know, I'm on Instagram and suddenly my property team are popping up. It's not really what you're looking for.
Okay. I think if we can just move on a little bit for areas for improvement, I just wanted to read out some of the comments from the focus group, and then just to pre-warn you, Mike, I'll probably come to you to see what kind of data you've got from StudentCrowd about kind of, I guess, frustrations really that could kind of relate to that initial period. So one person said, our flat had been completely missed in the cleaning process. So everyone in my flat had a room which was still dirty from the previous year. I mean, we know that like maintenance and communications is, you know, is the worst experience for a student. And we know that no operator would purposefully ever put a resident in that situation. Things get missed. We know that. It's an incredibly stressful time, the turnaround period. But that probably could be resolved quite easily with some amazing communication and amazing customer service to resolve that. One said the sound insulation could be improved and the Wi-Fi shouldn't disconnect frequently. So again, that's probably a bit of a reflection of, I guess, the expectation versus reality. You know, seeing a property, doing a viewing, seeing it on the website, and then actually moving in, you're going to start noticing those kind of niggly things as well. And then somebody said more social event opportunities as well. The other thing that we found really interesting was they said that some of the furniture gave them a bad first impression. Sandy, one of the students, said, our kitchen furniture feels like a waiting room, plastic chairs, a big blue table and bright blue sofas. It doesn't feel comfortable or homely. I think we always think that kind of, you know, something that feels like home, that feels like their family home, somewhere they can curl up at the end of the day on the sofa and watch TV, you know, or hang out together. That's going to be, you know, that's going to really kind of, I guess, alleviate some of that anxiousness and create that sense of home as well. So yeah, they were just kind of verbatim anecdotal. But Mike, what have you got to share with us?
So I mean, there is an awful lot to dive into in terms of negative experiences. So we can focus broadly, but just having a look. If you look at how this all bleeds into other areas, with the way that we accept reviews across 7 different criteria, and even if you just look at value for money as one, if you look into the reviews where there's been a negative score for value for money, so if it's been a 1 or a 2 star given by a student, obviously being too expensive is the most commonly cited reason, but behind that it's unresponsiveness and rudeness from staff, and that just shows the importance when you're going into other areas that it will lead on to, because that's not just a problem that you're having from a technical point of view, that is then going on to the perception of the building for other people who are going through, who are justifying the money that they've spent. So it's all well and good having the most expensive, shiny new building, and the majority of which I will say offer a fantastic service. So this is not me having a go at anybody, but if you've not got the staff in there running it, it is all of a sudden going to take away from that experience. There's no sticking plaster that can be paid for that will cover up having a bad staff experience. And then if you jump into the more operational side or a broader level, just looking at the types of topics that have been cited by students. So things like noise level will come up frequently and will have a significant impact. Things like cleaning and hygiene. So do this, things like rodents and pest control, odours and smell issues, bins and waste management. And the majority of these, as unsurprisingly, they're not going to be cited in a positive review. They're being cited negatively. There's not many people who are going to leave a 5-star review saying it was really nice we had these surprise pets in the kitchen. So it is looking at these things, and the thing is, they are all tangible and easy to control to a relative degree. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert in pest control by any stretch, but they are within your control, and they do have that impact on that student experience. And when you don't respond to them quickly, when you don't have the staff who are dealing with that, when you don't provide that clear communication in order to sort these issues, that is when it snowballs. That's when it becomes a negative experience. And that's when that negative experience, and it may only be for a handful of students. If you're looking at things like noise control, it may only be affecting one student who's just unfortunately living next door to a death metal fan. But if they're putting that out there on review platforms, if they're feeding that back to their peers who might be looking to move in, if they're going back home and talking to people who are looking at where they want to study, if they're moving from a far-flung place across the other side of the world, all of these things are going to have that snowball impact. So it's really important to make sure that you're not only addressing them, but you are communicating correctly, you're communicating quickly and clearly and with empathy, in order to make sure that these negatives don't turn into something that is bigger and that is going to sit out there, either in the public domain or be passed on anecdotally, and ultimately have that knock-on effect on your ability to fill rooms, your ability to provide the best service possible.
What struck me about some of the things that you said is quite a lot of them feel like maybe that shift in living with other people in a shared living environment as well. And I just wonder, as a sector, do you think that we prepare people, residents, enough of what it's like to share a flat with 5 other people, what it's like to share a corridor with 35 other people, what it's like to share a building with 500 people? Because a lot of these things are really that kind of shift change, I think, between living in a family environment, you know, some of them might only ever live with one other person, you know, to then living in this quite hectic, noisy, you know, environment. I don't know. Do you think there should be more comms around that shared living impact?
I mean, from what we see, I personally would say most likely yes. I mean, anecdotally, I can think back to when I started university a long time ago, it has to be said. And one thing that does stand out from my memory was how much easier it seems to be for the few kids that I knew who'd gone to boarding school, because they were used to all of that. They were used to that experience. I'd grown up living with one sibling and my mum and dad. I'd never lived around hundreds of people, and it can be very overwhelming. And you don't necessarily understand the etiquette. People have different expectations, standards. I don't want to think back to what the kitchens were like at the end of term, but I can remember certainly one of my housemates probably had a very bad experience because the rest of us weren't very good with the washing up. It's all those things that do need to be understood and communicated. And a lot of the time they are things that you learn when you're going along, because there isn't a tremendous amount. And I'm sure certainly Nicola will be able to talk about how HFS communicates these things to students a lot better than I could talk about them. But yeah, absolutely, I think there's space to prepare people for the social aspect of living together from a kind of a life experience point of view, as opposed to just the, oh, you're going to have some friends and there's going to be a party and all of these things that go with it.
Yeah, I think it's such a wide topic, isn't it? You know, because what one person needs in terms of what will it feel like to live with other people compared to, I'm not like, it's such a broad range, but I think there is more you can do. I think it's just also really important to remember when people are getting frustrated, making complaints, what's significant to one person might not be to another. And it's important to not sort of dismiss, it's only this, I don't know why they're getting so upset. And there's other times where I think, like, I've seen it where I think, if I was in that situation, I would be much angrier than they are. You know, we all have those moments. I can't think of anyone I know in operations that hasn't had a moment at check-in where someone's room hasn't been cleaned, and it absolutely isn't intentional, but it hasn't happened. We've all been there. And I think the point for me that Mike made loads is it's about communication, isn't it? It's about telling them what you're going to do, how you're going to action it quickly. All of these things that complain, they happen, you know, pests happen with all the goodwill in the world. They happen at times, you know, security things happen. Like you can't stop everything from happening. And actually, I would argue it's part of their experience of learning to live on their own is dealing with some of these issues. You know, sometimes it can be a thing around, we need to turn the water off for 2 hours because we need to fix something. And actually that can cause absolute mayhem in a property. And it's almost a life experience of them of actually sometimes things go wrong with systems, and this is the solution, and we're communicating to you, this is what it will look like, this is what it will feel like, this is how it will happen. But they almost need to to have that lived experience, because until they have that, it's very hard to explain to someone, you know, until you've had the lived experience of living with 4 or 5 other people and maybe different cultures and all that piece. It's really hard. The best way I can liken it is, you know, I had a baby a couple of years ago. No, I thought I was prepared for how much my life was. No one could prepare me for having that. And I almost take that back to students. You can prepare people so much for what that's going to be like, but there are so many variables in terms of, are they going to get on with who they're living with? Are they all going to have the same values? Is one person getting annoyed if something moves on a counter? You know, so I just think there's so many variables. It's about guiding them through that journey of becoming a young adult and not living at home anymore. And, you know, someone isn't going to come along and do your dishes. They're going to get annoyed if you don't do your dishes. So, and having those really constructive conversations help guide them to becoming a young adult as opposed to a young adult that's just moved out of home. I think that's the really key bit for me. But communication through it all is just key. If you keep telling people where you're up to and what's happening, that complaint will be much better than we'll do something with it, but we won't let you know.
Yeah, agree. And I think there's some interesting sort of differences between sort of demographics as well in our report, which I can share with. So postgraduates place more importance on feeling safe and calm than undergraduates. We're probably not surprised about that. Domestic students rank location and convenience higher than international students, and international students are slightly more concerned with safety and security. Again, I think we can probably all recognise those kind of traits and interests in those kind of demographic types as well. But I guess it just kind of goes to show about kind of communication and maybe complaint handling and priorities. It's all different depending on the makeup of your property. So to Nicola's point earlier, like 1 year shouldn't look like the next year and the next year, because your building might significantly change with those kind of different sort of demographic groups as well, which I think is really important. You know, your check-in weekend or your welcome event 1 year might look completely different the following year just because of who's in the building. I just want to give a quick time warning. We're probably in the last kind of 8-9 minutes of the discussion, so if anyone's got any questions, then now is the time to get them across.
We do have one, Sarah, if you wanted to go to it now. Would be interested to understand whether providers on the panel tailor their messaging by channel when communicating with parents. Do they deliberately change the content, depth, tone, or format of information across email, phone, SMS, and in person?
Probably most relevant for Nicola, I guess my initial reactions are we probably don't communicate with parents because they're not the tenancy holder.
No, I mean, I was just about to say, you know, our contact with parents is probably not as much as you would think. They aren't the tenancy holder, and you know, I go back to the phrase of these are young adults, you know, they aren't kids, it's not parents sending off to boarding school, so there isn't that much. I guess one thing we introduced was at check-in we will have a parents area, and it feels a bit more grown up, and it's a space for parents to go and have a minute away from all the chaos of what's going on, and I think some of the messaging there would be different. But I think what we try to do is tailor our communications so that they work for whoever's reading them, because I think the reality is, particularly if we talk about first year students, they are probably receiving the welcome comms and sitting down with someone to look at them and go through with them what things mean. I think, you know, generalizing again, not everyone, but lots of parents I think would want to also see that. So we do try to tailor them in a way that anyone can benefit from them. But yeah, very short answer is communication with parents is pretty low, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Like you said, they're adults, they're signing their own tenancy agreement. I've noticed that some parent areas in at check-in weekends have been called parent creches, and you know, that is basically to try and ensure that the operation staff are having those direct conversations with the tenancy holder. you know, rather than the parent, you know, and I probably count myself as a helicopter parent, just saying that I would probably be that parent, making sure my, you know, my son is asking the right questions and stuff. But actually at that point, they're going to have to live alone, you know, and I guess it's their, you know, but having said that, I think the parents' first impressions are just as important on that check-in weekend as well. And I think I know that it's often the parents that are asking questions like, wow, this is amazing. Can they live here again next year? And it's almost like they're probably your kind of route into that very initial kind of rebookers conversations as well. So yeah, maybe that's in answer to Jules's question. Maybe that's something, those communications maybe can be a bit more direct when you have the opportunity to do it at check-in weekend.
Yeah, I want parents to drive away at check-in feeling I've left my child somewhere that feels safe, somewhere that they're going to have a good time, and you know, they may be crying when they drive away, but I want them to be excited about what's ahead for their children. Like that's really, like if we've done that, we've nailed that check-in in my mind, and I just think it's really key.
Absolutely. What I'd like to do for the last few minutes is to go to each of the panelists and kind of for you all to sort of think about what, I guess, what you feel needs to change in the sector, what would improve, you know, the satisfaction is already incredibly high. So we're talking about marginal gains here, you know, but what do you think could work in properties over those first few months to create an even better kind of lasting impression as well? I'll come to you first, Ben.
I think for me, it's, I mean, obviously from a Utopi point of view, it's all about get as much data as you possibly can to influence a lot of these decisions. You know, thinking about complaints, like can you measure noise levels if the neighbours are noisy? You know, going back to your point, Nicola, around seeing how much time students are spending in their room, are they coming out enough? You know, are they sort of the safeguarding side of things? You can use technology to spot that. You know, we can create reports on, you know, how long students are spending time in the rooms, and you can use that information. I think try and automate as much of the interactions as you possibly can, just try and simplify things. But looking at the kind of what's influenced the first impressions, when I look at the data that's come out, aside from location and convenience, what they're looking for is friendly, helpful staff. They want to feel safe and secure, and they want a clean room, and they want an easy check-in. So if you want to try and sort of simmer some of the noise down to some of the basics that you can do really well, it feels like, you know, ticking those boxes at the beginning is going to set you up on the right foot going forwards. But alongside that, for us, we just try and provide our operators with as much possible operational data as we possibly can, and then they can use that to then influence their relationship with the students and try and give them the best possible experience.
Mike, what's your kind of overriding thoughts for improvements for the future?
So whether it's an improvement or not depends on who you're speaking to, because it depends on the culture of the business. But I would always say focusing on the staff and the communication is vital, not just to improve the experience and to ensure the students have the best moving experience, but to continue that trend going forward. And there's one example I always like to cite when speaking to operators. So we have rankings of all of the PBSA in every city in the UK based around the student reviews, and in the majority of cities, one of the top three spaces will normally be occupied by either a major operator or in some cases university accommodation, depending on the city and the market. But one outlier to a lot of this is in Coventry, and I won't cite the operator. You can go away and have a look at the Coventry rankings if you want, but the top spot is currently occupied by, and has been for quite a while now, by a small independent PBSA, less than 200 beds. And if you go through their reviews, you can see the majority of the positive reviews cite the same person over and over again, who is their property manager, a lady called Sonada, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, who acts as the communicator, acts as almost like their surrogate mum, make sure everything's working, make sure everything's communicated to them clearly, looks after the students, takes an interest in them. And all of those things help have that knock-on effect, especially when you're in those early stages of having that positive experience, feeling like you're valued, feeling like it's a home. And I would always say, don't run away from the feedback, actively embrace it, actively communicate. So it can become an evergreen policy. A lot of the operators who we work with have KPIs in place to ensure that their teams on site are trying to get the best reviews. And the best way to get those best reviews is by engaging with the students, communicating, creating that warm environment, having friendly, responsive staff. And with that, you then get the knock-on effect of those students having a good experience. You have the knock-on effect of them leaving a good review or telling their friends how great it is to live somewhere or booking again for the year ahead. And it becomes this evergreen strategy of, as long as you're getting that positive feedback because the staff are making sure that things are working and they're being friendly, that you'll get that positive feedback, you'll get the rebookers, you'll get the good word of mouth, and it will make it so much easier to fill your beds for the next year and the year after that, the year after that. So those would be my main thoughts on it.
And Nicola?
So I guess the results are positive, but I think what I take from it is we aren't there yet. Not everyone's 100% happy. So I think there is still work to do. I think you know, I agree with our people on the ground are absolutely our superpower. And I think giving them the freedom to know their properties, know the people living there, and to have the freedom to do what's right for those properties is something that's just so key. And I think, to Ben's point, anything we can do to give them more time to focus on that and not focus on, I need to get this data or I need to do this or whatever else, is only a good thing. But I think, you know, I always say to my teams, like, we aren't done. We can always do better in terms of student engagement. We know if we get that right, students will have a better time. They're more likely to stay at university. They're more likely to stay with us again in terms of rebookers. So I just think that for me is really key, is actually we're probably not at the point of we're done and what's next. Like, we aren't done yet. Yes, 60% of people are happy, but 40% of people were on the negative side of things, and there may be reasons for that. But I think the buildings never stop changing. They're alive. They never stop changing. So actually we're never done. We're never done, because we can never say that building is that and we're done there. We've nailed it. Everyone's happy. So I think it's just really important to remember that it's a cycle, right? We're all on that cycle all the time. You know, we're all already talking about summer at the moment. And I just think it's really key to remember and to use the feedback that you get and genuinely use it in a way that is impactful for students, because make some tangible changes to show we've listened to you and we know this will help you. I think that is the most positive thing we can do with any kind of feedback, is to actually genuinely care about it and use it, and that will make a difference to students.
So I was just reflecting as well that you know, we're talking about obviously changes with the Renters' Rights Act, and we know that there are a lot of students that are living in BTR and co-living as well. But this kind of mass migration of students is actually very specific to PBSA and university accommodation. So that kind of experience is very different probably to if a student was moving into a BTR or a co-living building. There's not going to be the fanfare, probably, you know, it won't be specialist support like PBSA gets. And I think, you know, as students are going to be making those decisions that, you know, about maybe going somewhere else and having more flexible contracts or shorter contracts or being allowed their pet or whatever, PBSA, this is their time to shine and really do what you do the absolute best, which is look after students. It's the one, you know, competitive advantage that the sector has over BTR and co-living. And I think that first impression, that check-in weekend, like you said, that liaison with parents, etc., I think that is an amazing opportunity. So yeah, so if we revisited this report, you know, in a year's time, we'd love to see, you know, even higher than 86% satisfaction. I think that would be a really great benchmark. We are going to have to come to a close though, so I'm going to hand over to Deenie, and thank you to our panelists.
Cool. Thank you all. That was, as ever, really insightful. So thank you all for your time, and to our audience for joining us. Also, a big congratulations to the sector. I know that there's always room for continuous improvement, but there's some great results there. So I think we should pat ourselves on the back when we've done something great. So congratulations to everyone across the sector for those great results. We did create the Youth Forum to provide the sector free insight and share this out. So we do have lots of reports, so do make sure you go and look at those reports and see what you can learn. We're just finalising this report and it will be out with you as soon as possible. And if you have been registered, then it will come out to you automatically. But most of all, thank you so much for joining us, especially because it is a lovely sunny day finally. So thank you so much for all being here. and we hope to see you next time.